Hey there, Coach Patrick here, Endurance Nation, back with another weekly coach videocast slash podcast. Every week, I sit down with you, our faithful listeners and viewers, to talk about endurance challenges facing members of Endurance Nation, challenges that we've seen, we experienced, learned from, and that we're sharing forward our knowledge to you. Endurance Nation works by gathering a group of endurance athletes who are both ultra social, but also ultra dedicated to the craft of cultivating endorphins and experiencing the endurance lifestyle, living it to its fullest. And we get better together by sharing our lessons learned, by meeting each other at races, by training together virtually, having a lot of fun along the way while we work super hard. It's a ton of fun and it's a great place to be. You should check us out at endurancestation.us. So, that said, unlocking the endurance lifestyle has many different pieces of it. And today's topic, we're going to talk about heat. Put my red Endurance Nation hat on for those of you who have questions or concerns about the heat. But the heat is one of those unique elements to training and racing, which I think is really critical for us to solve. Not simply because it's becoming endemic, that it's just everywhere. The races, even early season races, late season races, there's some element of heat. And if not the heat, then certainly extreme weathers as well. But on the whole, being adapted to and ready for the heat prepares you for all manner of conditions. Being cold adapted doesn't prepare you for the hot. If you're heat adapted and it's cold, you're fine. But it really gives you a new appreciation for what it means to manage your body in extreme conditions. There'll be extreme wind on certain races or extreme terrain, but rarely are there conditions that ultimately affect the way that your body itself performs, right? And the heat does that. So it's a true crucible, a true opportunity for you to understand the biomechanics of you and your body and performance on the day, and a way for you to work on that in your training and become better at it over time on the race itself. Now, most endurance athletes look at heat as the enemy, right? It's going to be hot today. I've got to run, but there's this heat. I'll run earlier, I'll run tonight, or I won't run at all today. I'll run tomorrow. And we work ourselves around the heat. When we start thinking about racing in a hot situation or hot climate, or specifically a hot area or race that's known for the heat, putting heat training into our schedule actually becomes a critical component of our preparation. In a way, races that have more heat are actually better for you if you're a competitive athlete, simply because the heat itself is a great equalizer. All manner of fitness aside, people do well in the heat or they don't. It's a function of their physiology. It's a function of their adaptation earlier, or acclimation. It's a function of how they execute on the day, how strategic they can be, and ultimately also a reflection on just the decisions that they make across the course of the day, nutritionally, pacing wise, etc. So there's a myriad of factors that go into it, but it takes the emphasis off of who is the greatest physical specimen or who can work the hardest, etc. Managing the heat successfully in training and racing requires a unique combination of factors. And the good news is there are qualities that we can all develop, and we don't have to be the best at any one of them, but if we're pretty good at most of them, we can be very successful on a hot day. All right. So when we think about racing in high temperatures, here are 5 things that I want you to think about as you plan to and prepare for racing in the heat. Are you ready? Let's do it. Okay. Number 1, zone 1 heat training. So the top thing that people do when they go wrong with their heat training is that they just put in too much effort, right? So you're racing for this half Ironman. You want to ride in zone 3 tempo training, or as we call it inside the team, ABP, always be pushing. And then you get into a hot environment, or you set yourself up to race hard and you say, well, I got to ride it's going to be hot, but I want to ride my race watts or my race effort. I'm going to ride my race effort in these hot conditions. That's a recipe for disaster in the early stages of heat acclimation. Ultimately, your body works much harder in hot conditions. And in most cases, even a zone 1 over time on the bike can feel like a zone 3 effort in normal conditions over time. So after the first hour, in the first hour itself, 0 to 60 minutes, you'll be like, man, not so bad. But 60 to 120, you'll be like, in the last 60 minutes, if it's a 3-hour session, brutal, like literally brutal. And you're riding the same number, it's just hot, and your body is accumulating that heat. And as a result, having to adapt to that heat situation is performing at lower than optimal levels and leaving you in a terrible place because you simply can't shed that heat, especially if you're training indoors. So when you are doing early heat training, do yourself a favor and really keep the effort level low. What I recommend to people to do is that we will early season get them to do some of these sessions with heat, whether it's indoors or outdoors, in zone 1, because we specifically structure these as recovery rides. So you're going zone 1 this week. Last week you went super hard, had a big session. This week we're consolidating fitness, taking care of ourselves. So we're going to spend time. We're going to do 4 hours in zone 1 which is to you sounds like a total waste of time as a coach. I know it's a really strong physiological adaptation mechanism. And the way that I get you to do it is I say, well, we can kind of turn the temperature up a little bit. We can make it a little hot for you, but you got to stay in zone one. So people will stay in zone one for me because they know they need the recovery, but they're also doing it with some heat. So you're getting some bonus adaptation as well. That, my friends, is a win-win. So zone one heat training. Get too aggressive with the effort inside those hotter temperatures. You will pay the price and it will set you back for future workouts, which is a recipe for a downward spiral into a big race. Don't want that. All right. Number 2, create and test your cooling plans. How are you going to stay cool in the day? Now, it's not possible to be ultimately cool, but depending on your sport, depending on the terrain, the conditions, there will be opportunities for you to shed some of the heat that your body is accumulating. What does that look like for you? Right? If the humidity is high, then covering your skin isn't necessarily the answer. But if it's drier temperatures and drier temperatures, but drier air, but the heat is on, then covering the skin can make a big difference. What are you going to put on your head? Are you going to cover your head? Or are you going to go with a visor? Or are you going to go with a cloth covering? What are you going to do to sort of keep the heat off your body, but also stay super cool? You may like your trucker hat because you can fill it with ice in the A station and delicately put it back inside your head, keeping, of course, all the ice neatly trapped inside to cool your head down. But other people may prefer a different mechanism. So what's that strategy? How will you handle the A stations on the bike? How will you handle them on the run? How will you handle them when you're just training? If you're talking about ultra racing, how will you handle racing in the evening when it's cooler than racing during the day when it's hot, right? Like how will you adjust things accordingly? Super important to know, but very important for you to kind of create a plan for it, like literally write it out, bullets online on paper, and then execute that plan. Does it work or does it not work? You learn a great deal about your body and actually what makes you cool from going through that process. So for me, I knew that pouring water on my arms on the bike helped to make me cool. What I didn't appreciate was that actually part of what the water is doing is pulling the heat out of your body. But if that heat stays on your arms, like if the moisture stays on your arms, it's not as effective. Once the water has absorbed some of that heat out of your system, we need to get rid of that water. So actually wiping my arms off of the water off of my arms after I've gotten them wet makes me instantly cooler, like 5 degrees cooler. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't experienced it myself firsthand. That's a key lesson learned for me moving forward, that though all the moisture is important, actually getting that moisture off my skin, making room for more sweat to appear, but also sort of completing that end cycle of the conduction of heat outside of my skin surface becomes really important. And so testing that plan and capturing those lessons learned is really important. Okay. Great resources inside the team on that as well. Number 3, capturing your heat training lessons learned. This is really important. I kind of just alluded to it a little bit, but go through those lessons learned. So maybe you tried to ride your bike indoors, but did too hard. Capture that. Like what happened to you when? Like go through, look at the data, try and figure it out, right? What nutrition did you take that worked? Which nutrition did you take that didn't work, right? Was it ice or was it cold water? Was it sports drink or was it something different? Was it, Red Bull or was it Coke? Like what are the things that worked for you? Like how did you manage your nutrition later in the day relative to earlier in the day as the temperature increased across the course of your ride? What of those rides were good? What of those were bad? Like one of the reasons why we have a training log and a training journal is to capture key lessons just like this. And this block of period when you are training or dealing with heat adaptations in preparation for race, we capture tons of information. This is great to recalibrate in the last 2 weeks of your preparation when we start writing our race plan. You can go back and say, what are the lessons that I learned? Not just the ones that I remember front of mind, but the ones that I learned from this training. We can have those on hand in your training log or in a diary or wherever you save your notes. And you can use those as a resource as you plan going forward. Whether or not you incorporate them in your plan, they are part of who you are as an athlete and become part of your resource knowledge that you can use on race day to make better decisions. Number 4, identifying a temperature cap. Look at that little cap action there. More hat jokes. We all have a ceiling at which we know we can't go beyond. And while it's hard to measure your core body temperature, although there are devices out there that do it for you, we recommend that simply using your heart rate as a guide will let you know. So there's a heart rate that you've earned in your training and race preparation, et cetera, through to the race. And that's something your body's acclimated to. For me, on the run, say it's 140 beats. I know that 140 beats is pretty good for me, kind of upper end of effort level, but not too hot. Probably 136 to 138 is a little bit better for me, but that's just what it is. So I know that when I hit that 136 to 140 range on my heart rate, no matter where I am on the run, no matter what mile, no matter what the conditions, I'm entering that danger zone. And I know that anytime I spend above 140, I'm going to be significantly accumulating heat at a rate through which I cannot shed it unless I stop. right? And since I don't want to avoid stopping at all costs until I hit a finish line, I know that getting over that 140 is really detrimental to my performance, and I have to do everything I can to stay underneath that number. So while I can't measure my core body temperature, I can look at my heart rate and say, consistent heart rates above this level set me up for failure. So I can avoid those heart rates in general, which means my body's not exerting itself as much, which means that I'll stay underneath the core body temperature cap. But we need to know what those numbers are. Let's start by capturing those in your training from your normal heart rates and efforts that you put up in the disciplines of your event. And then we can start using those as caps and testing them in your training, right? And then finally, determine your pacing parameter. So the way that we keep our race going, but still avoid doing damage is by having pace parameters. Whether you're using power or you're using speed or whatever the metric may be for you, understand like what those parameters are. So for me, I'm keeping my heart rate in a special place, but I have a power number that I run with. Since I use the Stride run power meter, I say that with air quotes on the power meter side. But it does give me consistent numbers that I can run against. And so I know based on my experience that as long as I'm running this wattage, say it's 240 watts, I know that my heart rate will generally be in its happy place. So I can come out of transition and not just play defense on my heart rate, but I can run my race and manage my heart rate. So I can still run the race I want using my power meter on my shoe or my pace, whatever you may be using, and then monitor my heart rate to make sure that I'm in a happy place. Inversely, if I'm just looking at heart rate, then I have no measure of the work that I'm putting into that heart rate, and I may grossly underestimate or overestimate it until I see the lag of that turnaround on my heart rate data, because heart rate data lags on the day, right? I make a bad decision now, I won't see it for 30 to 45 seconds. Might be too late at that point in time. But having a power meter or a speed number on the dial right away lets me know just how hard I'm working and make better real-time decisions. And so I use that. And so in training, I reverse engineer based off my heart rate cap, what my power numbers look like on the flats and the uphills. And then I use those numbers to define the targets I have on race day, which is my race pacing parameters. I practice them in my training in the last couple of weeks into the race, and I also plan on using them on race day. And that combined knowledge of not only what my core temperature ceiling cap looks like from a heart rate perspective, but then also the corresponding pace or power inputs that go along with it, put me ultimately in control of my fate on race day, because I've gone a long way from just training in zone one in our first bullet to really having a solid understanding of not only my physiology, but how I perform in the heat conditions that I'll be concerned about on race day. And I can become a better athlete and have a better performance overall. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this 5-point framework was useful for you. If you've got questions or comments, hit us on Facebook, or as always, head over to endurancenation.us where you can create a trial membership, 30 days membership for free. Connect with me, Coach Patrick, and the teammates here inside the team. We'll be happy to walk with you any of our protocols and get you up to speed, whatever your race may be. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a fantastic week.